Whether you are a veteran of the TCG tables or brand new to the wide world of card games, understanding the details of a new card game can be a daunting task. Lucky for you, Ready Set Draw is here to guide you. Welcome to episode 4 of Lorcana Lessons. Now that you have an understanding of card types and have a deck of your own ready to go, let's walk through the start of a game and give you some gameplay tips to get you one jump ahead of the competition. For this video, we'll assume that you're going to play against one opponent. Multiplayer games follow the same general rules, but they have a different pace and require a different strategy to win. So they'll be covered in a future episode. With that out of the way, let's get this game started. The first thing we do is decide who goes first. It's your choice on how to decide, but our crew usually uses a dice roll with the highest roll getting to choose. We would suggest choosing to go first whenever possible. Every TCG has its own way of trying to balance the advantage of going first, and Lorcana is no different. The Lorcana rules state that the player going first does not draw a card to start their first turn. This may seem like a big deal since you're missing out on a card, but the advantage of getting to play cards and gain ink before your opponent means that you get to set the pace of a game and usually quest first too. So let's say you won the dice roll and chose to go first. Let's shuffle up the deck and get this game rolling. It doesn't matter how it's done as long as it's sufficiently randomized. Even though it's not specifically required in the rules, it's considered good sportsmanship to offer your opponent a chance to cut your deck before drawing your opening hand. Usually, they'll just divide the deck in half, but some people like to get fancy with it. After that's settled, you can draw 7 cards to see your opening hand. We aren't locked into these 7 cards to start the game, because the rules allow us to try and make it even better before our first turn with a do-over, or in TCG terms, a mulligan. The mulligan process is actually one of the most important skills to practice with your deck, since it's the only game-changing decision you're guaranteed to make every single game. In Lorcana, the mulligan rules are very easy to learn and can greatly impact the quality of your game. After seeing your first 7 cards, the first player, that's you in this scenario, can put any number of them on the bottom of your deck without revealing them, and then draw cards until your hand has 7 cards again. Then player 2 goes through the same process. After that, you reshuffle your decks and the first player starts their turn but skips drawing a card. Before we jump into a turn though, let's go over some mulligan tips using this example princess-themed deck. It's important to note that some decks with their own unique strategies will want to hunt for specific cards for combos while going through a mulligan, but the following tips are for your typical beginner-friendly deck that just wants to play cards on curve and build up to a win. So how do we get good at the mulligan? Tip number 1 is to prioritize having enough low-cost cards. While it's fun to dream about playing all those mid to high-cost splashy cards when you see them, without some cards to keep you in the game early, you'll be losing before you ever get a chance to play them. Ideally, around 4 of your starting 7 are cards that you could see yourself playing in the first 3 turns of a game, with the other 3 cards being cards that you could add to the inkwell if needed. This brings up tip number 2. Have a plan for the early game. Your first few turns are unique because you go into them knowing most of the cards at your disposal. Take this chance in the mulligan to think about what you will ink and what you will play on turn 1. Then repeat that for turns 2 and 3. Yes, you'll be drawing cards that you don't know as you start each turn, but consider those a bonus and craft your master plans now. Just because you have something that costs 2 to play on turn 2 in your opening hand doesn't mean it's the ideal card to play on turn 2. So consider hunting for an extra 2-cost option with your mulligan to maximize your chances to win. Nothing will bury your chances to win faster than not playing cards early on. Lastly, tip number 3. Be careful keeping uninkable cards. As mentioned in lesson number 3, these cards are useless unless you have ink to play them, and some are only at their best in specific situations that you can't guarantee. So be sure to only keep these types of cards when you know you can use them early in the game, or predict that you'll need them soon. Alright, now that we've crafted our perfect hand with good mulligan practices, let's start the game. A turn in Lorcana consists of the beginning phase and main phase. The beginning phase has 3 steps. Ready, where you ready all of your exerted cards. Set, where you handle any card effects that happen at the start of your turn. And then draw, where you draw your first card of the turn. So, ready, set, draw. That sounds familiar. Once the beginning phase is over, you start the main phase of your turn, where you get to make all of your decisions. There are many actions you can take during your main phase, including playing cards, using abilities, challenging, or questing. If you aren't sure what those terms mean, then you may need to check out lessons number 1 and 2, where we covered all of the card types and general rules. The focus of this lesson, however, is more about the tips to make the best choices during your main phase to help you win a game. Through the beginning and middle of a game, one of the toughest choices can be which card to ink in your hand for the turn. We cover specific ink suggestions in our deck tech videos, but in general, you want to ink cards that are less useful for the current stage of the game you're in. This means inking high-cost cards in the earlier turns, and inking the super expensive or low-cost cards in the middle of the game when they are less impactful. You may be tempted to skip playing a card as ink each turn, but avoid the temptation if you haven't reached an ink amount that can play your higher cost cards. It's usually better to have the extra ink and not need it, rather than to need the ink and not have it. Inkwell choices may be the first choice you make, but making the rest of the choices in a turn involves the most important concept: sequencing. Sequencing is how you order all of your decisions, and it can make a huge difference in how your turn plays out. Here's an example to show you what I mean. Let's say we have this situation on the board. Our characters in play are Minnie Mouse and Jasmine, both with 2 damage on them. We have some princesses in our hand that we want to play, and we just drew a coconut basket. But our opponent's Captain Hook and Prince Eric are looking very scary, and we'd like to get rid of them to make things safer. How we sequence this turn can lead to wildly different outcomes. After inking the Hey, we could just challenge both of their characters with our 2 princesses, and then play Ariel and Aurora. But what if we changed up the order a bit? Instead, let's play Coconut Basket first. Then we can play an Aurora, healing the 2 damage from Minnie thanks to the coconuts, and follow that up with another Aurora to heal up Jasmine as well. This allows Minnie to banish Captain Hook and Jasmine to banish Prince Eric in challenges and survive to tell the tale. Just like that, we've used sequencing to end our turn with a much better setup than the first choice. We have 4 princesses ready to quest for 7 lore next turn, and a coconut basket to heal them instead of only having 2 princesses with only 4 lore available. Think that tip is helpful? How about 3 more gameplay guidelines to strengthen your skills? Guideline number 1. Use as much ink as possible on your turn. Most of the time, if you're trying to decide between which 2 cards of different costs to play on your turn, the choice that spends more ink is usually better. The only time spending less ink on your turn makes sense is if it's the only way to solve a problem that you need to address quickly. More expensive cards typically force your opponent to have more expensive answers. Guideline number 2. Consider any favorable trades as an absolute win. By trade, I mean you and your opponent using cards to deal with each other. And by favorable, I mean you spending less ink or using less cards in the trade than your opponent did. If your opponent uses a Dragonfire to banish your Pascal, don't cry about it. Yeah, you both used up 1 card, but they spent 5 ink on theirs, and you only spent 1. Go you! If your Aurora Dreaming Guardian was damaged by your opponent's 2 Fire the Cannons and then banished by their goons, they may have spent 3 ink, but they used 3 cards to deal with your 1. Go you! Gaining small advantages like this over the course of a game is how you build up to a win. And speaking of winning, guideline number 3. Challenging can even the playing field, but questing wins games. If you find yourself constantly challenging and not questing throughout a game, you're either always behind or you're throwing away opportunities to get closer to a win. Characters with the challenger keyword often make these challenges more worthwhile, but even they often do more work for you by questing when it's safe. Unless your deck's main strategy is to do so, the longer you spend your game just clearing your opponent's board of characters, the more time you give them to build up to a threat that you can't deal with. Missing out on 2 lore with your Jasmine because you just had to clear out their Hey when it really wasn't threatening you is how you start to fall behind. So just keep questing as long as you see that your characters won't be cleared with ease. Hopefully this Lorcana lesson gave you the knowledge not just to play a game of Lorcana, but to win a game and have fun doing it. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. Having fun playing, but also getting better at the game so you minimize those frustrating mistakes. If you think we did a good job of explaining this process, then feel free to share this video with someone who you think may need the lesson themselves. If you enjoy this content and would like more, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell so you'll be notified when we upload. We're looking forward to seeing you in episode 5. But until then, this has been Jacob from Ready Set Draw. Class dismissed.